Good afternoon, everybody. Again, we're so glad you could join us for our first public webinar of 2025. As you can see, we once again have our AMA Analysis and Rating Department here to present AMA Guides 5th edition, and specifically chapters 16 and 17. One of our legendary raters, Tim Mussack, is going to take the lead, and we have Alex Sadek and David Roman here to assist with questions. Thank you all so much for being here with us. And so with that, let's get to the fun stuff. We're going to do some quick intros. Alex, you want to start us off?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Alex Sadek. I am part of the Bradford and Barthel rating team. I came on board late last year, but my background is in claims. I've got both TPA and insurance carrier experience, and I've been enjoying doing the ratings.
Thank you. Okay, Dave.
Hi, good morning, everyone. My name is Dave Roman, or David Roman, rating specialist with Bradford Barthel's rating team, and I'm by a slight margin the newest member of the team. I started in November. Prior to that, I was a hearing representative and a paralegal with several applicant attorney firms. Appeared at conferences over and over and over every week. MSCs, those things we love to do. Anyway, really happy for the transition to Bradford Barthel. Thanks.
And I'm Tim Mussack. I'm with Bradford Barthel. I do ratings. My experience is, past experience was in claims as well, and been with Bradford Barthel doing ratings since 2000, when? 2008, long time. So here we go. We're going to talk about ratings. This is our ratings department. Kenny is on vacation this week, or he'd be on with us, but the rest of us are here. This is how you get in contact with us. And for ratings, you need a rating schedule, you need a money chart, and you need the guides to evaluation of permanent impairment. The 5th edition is the one we use in California. It's the green colored one. They have different colors for different editions of it. So I'm going to just do a quick review of the rating schedule and a couple of points in particular that are important and sometimes get overlooked. You want to see that you're getting the correct impairment number. As I mentioned, the first 2 digits tell you what chapter number that impairment comes from. Today, we're going to talk about chapter 16, the upper extremities, and chapter 17, the lower extremities. So impairment numbers for rating those from those 2 chapters are going to begin with the 16 if it's an upper extremity, or 17 if it's a lower extremity. And you can find it that way. They're in numerical order, the impairment numbers are in the rating schedule. So you should be able to find the impairment number if you look through in order. Everything's in order, nothing that you really have to memorize. Know that you can look everything up, it's all in order. Occupational group number is another aspect of ratings that sometimes gets overlooked. There are resources within the rating schedule that can help you get to the correct one. So section 3. So I would just, if you are doing ratings, learning ratings, been doing ratings, make yourself aware of that section 3, the occupational group number, towards the end of that, after the alphabetical listing of the occupations. There's resources in there for helping you get to the right one. The job title doesn't always do it for us. So use that information in there. It really can be helpful. PD rating string, here's what one looks like. And whoops, I went right by it. Here's what one looks like. And this tells you what the different elements are, and it's just you work your way step by step, starting with the impairment number, the WPI, and doing the adjustments that we do in California. And California is pretty unique in doing all these other adjustments. A lot of states use the AMA guides, 5th edition, but California has its unique method of doing adjustments after that. Once you get to the permanent disability, then you need to find your money chart and get the correct valuation of that permanent disability for that injury. Combine, add, and CVC, combined values chart, is in the rating schedule. When we're putting numbers together in California work comp, we are adding or combining, and they don't mean the same in California work comp. They might mean the same somewhere else in some other context, but not when you're doing ratings in California workers' compensation. They mean something different. Combine is putting numbers together so they, by a mathematical formula, so that you can't get over 100%. You don't have to do the math in this case. The rating schedule has a combined values chart that has every combination in it, so you can just use that and never have to do the math. And the general rule when using the AMA guides and the rating schedule is, for most situations when you're putting numbers together, you're gonna combine, unless there's specific instructions otherwise to add. But most of the time we put numbers together, we're combining them. But it's not always a specific rule that you can follow every single step of the way on every single rating. For example, in the AMA guide, strength, upper extremity strength, if that's being used for one body part, you add the values. If it's lower extremity strength for one body part, for instance, the knee, you would combine the strength assessments. And this is the one page of what that combined values chart looks like in the rating schedule. The AMA guides also has a combined values chart at the back end of it in the glossary, but there are, I think, 6 errors in the higher numbers there. The rating schedule is correct. Every single combination is correct. So you don't ever have to do the math. There it is. So here we are. We're going to look at the AMA guide. Again, an introduction. We're going to talk about where to find things. I have 23 figures and tables copied in here. I've got a lot of information, but really what I want to do, a lot of people haven't really looked at one much according to their responses. So I wanted to get you an idea what it looks like and how you find things you want to find. There's 18 chapters plus a glossary, 613 pages. There's a lot of stuff in there. So it's a big, thick book that can be intimidating. So you kind of got to take it a piece at a time. We're going to take pieces, chapter 16 and chapter 17, and we're going to look at what how we normally use that, what are the most frequent uses in terms of understanding impairment, and where we go from there. The AMA guides are not jurisdictionally specific. By that, I mean, it wasn't created for California work comp. It was created for addressing impairment, permanent impairment, and a lot of jurisdictions use it. And we're not alone in that regard. Our 2005 rating schedule is California specific. And because of that, we have, if there's any discrepancies or disagreements between instructions in the AMA guides and the rating schedule, we defer to the rating schedule. We take those instructions instead of the AMA guides instructions. There's not many, but they're seemingly minor, but we use the rating schedule instructions anytime there's a difference between the two. AMA guides, chapters 1 and 2. Don Barthel continuously preaches to me that those are the Bible and I should pay attention to them, and indeed they are. They tell us, the chapter 1 tells us about the philosophy, purpose, appropriate use. Chapter 2 talks about the practical application. Within the AMA guides, there's figures and tables, and those often will give what's considered average normal measures for different body parts and different motions for joints of the upper and lower extremities. The AMA guides tells us that we interpolate and round from those figures and tables at appropriate times. It doesn't cover every single possibility, so you have to do some interpolation and some rounding. With respect to rounding, in terms of doing ratings, at every step of every rating process, you round to a whole number. We don't want to deal with fractions. It just gets too cumbersome and offers deviations that really aren't helpful to anybody. So every step of the way, round to a whole number. And by rounding, we're doing true rounding, 0.5 and above rounds to the next higher whole number. Below 0.5 rounds to the next lower whole number. So true rounding. When we're looking at the AMA guides and then looking at the rating schedule, we want to pay attention to values that are taken from the AMA guides. There's whole person impairment, which is what we use to rate. 100% whole person is an entire is a 100% disabled. It's whole person impairment is what we rate. Chapters 16 and 17 that we're going to look at have different values in most of the figures and tables. For chapter 16, there's upper extremity impairment values for most of the figures and tables, and those are based on the premise that an entire extremity, 100% of an upper extremity, is worth 60% whole person. So that ratio plays out. So when we get an upper extremity value, the doctors usually convert that to whole person for us, but we want to make sure that that's done because we only want the whole person value. In general, you take the upper extremity value times 0.6 and you'll get the whole person value. Nothing you need to memorize. There's tables within chapter 16, but know that you're looking for a whole person impairment value eventually in order to rate it. For the lower extremity, 100% of a lower extremity is 40% whole person. That was the amputation at the hip. It's thigh level and above on a lower extremity. Amputation thigh level and above is 40% whole person. That's maximum value for a lower extremity. So keep those things in mind. Within those chapters, they're going to have values that are specific and allow a doctor to be more precise in their calculations. Chapter 1 of the AMA guides, I think, is a great, just a real great paragraph overview of how the 0 to 100% WPI system works. 0%, there's no significant functional consequences from an injury or impairment. 90 to 100%, it's very severe, requiring the individual to be fully dependent on others for self-care, approaching death. So it covers the entire spectrum. This really can kind of help us if we understand the significance of the injury from the documentation of clinical findings and whatnot, that we should be able to see where at that particular injury that we're dealing with fits in that spectrum. Activities of daily living. There's a table within the AMA guides. This is in chapter 1. This is not the only one, but it just gives us an idea what the doctors are to be focusing on is the results from an injury, the permanent results from an injury as they affect usual activities of daily living. Again, this is not a complete comprehensive list by any means, but it's something to help everybody think about what should be considered. AMA guides chapters 1 and 2 talk about ultimately what the California Code of Regulations also indicate, that the doctors have a duty to report and write their reports in such a manner that anybody can read it and understand what they're saying with respect to permanent disability and impairment that they're addressing. And anybody reading their report should be able to come up to similar conclusions. That doesn't mean we have to be doctors, but the doctor needs to explain what they're doing in a term that other people can read. They have that obligation. If they're doing workers' comp, that's what they've signed on for, and that's what we should be able to expect. We should be able to read it. We don't know everything that they're talking about, but we can look it up. But we should be able to understand in order to see how they use the AMA guides from the documentation in their report. In general, from the AMA guides, the nature of the physical injury, it's impairment, loss affecting ADLs. It's not work capacity. Way back in the olden days, we dealt with work capacity, but when we started using the AMA guides, the focus was to activities of daily living. It's got to be permanent, it's got to be objective, and it's got to be non-overlapping with residuals from another injury or body part. It's got to be measurable, and it should be consistent and reproducible. That's how we know it's objective. So those are the elements within the AMA guides. Throughout the AMA guides, it's got to be permanent, objective, non-overlapping, measurable, so that we can see that it's consistent, reproducible, and we know it's objective. from the DWC has given us that guidance, actually the DEU at the DWC conference. General principles of the guide is to have an objective basis for rating impairment. And in general, objective findings should lead the doctor to the correct chapter, the correct table within that chapter, and the correct class or category. And then there's usually some discretion for the doctor to select WPI within that class or category. Chapter 16 we're at now, and I'm checking my time, and I'm going far along. I am not seeing questions yet, so I'm just going to keep on going here. As I mentioned earlier, Chapter 16 dealing with the upper extremities, most of the tables and figures in there are going to be upper extremity values. It allows the doctor to be more precise in terms of their calculations and measures and assessment of impairment. Ultimately, once the upper extremity total value is obtained for each body part, it's converted to whole person so we can rate it. Hand impairment, there's different values for that. Again, the doctor's got to be even more precise to calculate that. So their AMA Guides Chapter 16 has tables and figures that address digit impairment values, and there's different values for the different digits. The thumb is worth 40% of the hand. These two digits are each worth 20%. These two are each worth 10%. So when a doctor's evaluating, they've got to be sure that they're looking at the right tables, the right values for digits. If they're looking at a hand, they really have to be more precise and have to be more attentive to which digits they're dealing with and doing the calculation that way. So when we're reading a report from a doctor that's evaluating a hand, we should be attuned to that and kind of pay attention. We're not rating digit impairment value. We're not rating hand impairment value. We're not rating upper extremity impairment value. We're going to rate the whole person impairment value. So it's got to be continually calculated into the whole person impairment value. And there are instructions for each method of evaluating digits in hands. I want to show you some figures from within Chapter 16. You don't have to memorize these. I just give you an idea of what the AMA Guides looks like. Chapter 16, the first, early in the chapter, there's 2 pages of figures that show an upper extremity and the different parts of it. And the doctor can, they don't have to, some do, most don't, but they can enter their objective data from their examination within these 2 figures, and there's instructions within the figures for how to calculate the impairment. Specifically, it's a real meticulous process when you're dealing with multiple digits, because there's a lot of different instructions in here, and it really does require a focused attention in order to get it right. But they can do that, and they can do it on the rest of the upper extremity as well. I want to point out one of the reasons we sometimes get something that doesn't fit us when we're rating, when the doctor is doing Chapter 16, is because down here at the bottom of this figure 16.1b, it instructs the doctor to get a total upper extremity impairment for each arm. That's the AMA Guides instructions. As I said, the AMA Guides is not specific to California. In California, that's nice to have, but we've got to rate it separately. We've got to rate a shoulder separately. We rate an elbow separately. We rate a wrist separately. We rate a hand separately, whereas the AMA Guides instructions are to get the whole upper extremity value. In many jurisdictions, there's a value assigned to an upper extremity, and so the doctor offering what percentage of that upper extremity allows them in other jurisdictions to turn that into a permanent disability value and a monetary amount. California, we need to rate each body part separately, and we combine them after we rate them. As I mentioned, there's conversion tables within each chapter, Chapter 16 and 17. And here's one of the conversion tables from Chapter 16. This is converting digit values to hand values. There's another table that converts hand value to upper extremity value, and a third table to convert upper extremity value to WPI. So again, if a doctor is dealing with digits, there's a lot of conversion going on. Just we want to be aware of that if the doctor's doing that. But if they're dealing with upper extremity, absolutely, we're converting from upper extremity to whole person. We only rate whole person. So the three methods we see the most for upper extremity evaluation is range of motion, peripheral neuropathy, and that includes carpal tunnel, which is the median nerve below mid forearm. We see a lot of that in California work comp. And other disorders, a generic other disorders for which a lot of different things fall into. So we're going to go through those a little bit. The AMA guide suggests that you compare both extremities if you're dealing with range of motion. And the philosophy there is maybe for this particular individual, average normal that's in the AMA guides isn't this individual's average normal. Maybe they have lesser average normal. In some cases, maybe they have greater average normal. But the AMA guide suggests that the doctor look at both and see if maybe this person's average normal really was not the same as the usual average normal. Most of the time, the average normal AMA guides is an appropriate assessment for evaluating loss. But sometimes an adjustment might be needed based on that. The instructions in the AMA guides are to take the greatest from consistent measures. I put 3. It's written differently in different chapters in different places in the AMA guides. It's listed as few as 2 consistent measures, but ultimately consistent measures. It's not just one measurement. There should be more than one measurement, and it's the greatest measure. Most doctors have adopted the 3 consistent measures in order to make sure it's reproducible, and that's how you can ensure the objectivity of that evaluation. And the figures within the AMA guides don't have every single degree of measurement, so there's going to be some need to interpolate the values from the figures within the AMA guides and round to a whole number at each step in terms of the calculations. And I think, yes, I've got the 3 different, this is just for the shoulder, and I just wanted to give an idea of what they look like and how they're used. Nothing to memorize, just this is what they look like. Chapter 16, range of motion, is really a pretty frequently used in method of evaluation of an upper extremity. But I'm going to show you chapter 17 range of motion tables later, and it strikes me every time I look at it how different they are. But here we're going to look at chapter 16, and we're going to look at shoulder. In general, every table, with the exception of thumb CMC joint, is structured the same way in chapter 16. There's a chart with degrees of motion values. There's a chart that corresponds the measured motion of flexion to upper extremity impairment. And there's an arc that shows upper extension impairment from measured motion, and then one that shows ankylosis, which turns out to be addition of the flexion and extension, which makes sense. So as you can see, it can't cover every number. So if you've got a measurement with between 150 and 160, for example, the doctor's got to interpolate and perhaps round what that should be. And the rounding goes 0.5 and above goes up, below 0.5 goes down. So 155 degrees is going to round to 2% upper extremity. Every table is going to tell you the value of the impairments that are listed in there. So these are upper extremity impairments. And there's 3 separate shoulder motion impairments. So because there's 3 separate planes, external rotation, internal rotation, abduction, adduction, and flexion and extension. So the doctor needs to measure all of those if they're evaluating shoulder motion. And what we do with shoulder motion then is add the value for each of them. And so the doctor, let's just assume this example, these measures, the doctor looks up upper extremity impairment value for all of them, and they're added to 10% upper extremity motion. We don't rate 10%. We're going to convert that to whole person. The doctor will probably do that. And I think we have a question that we should address.
Tim, really quickly, can you touch on the difference between active range of motion versus passive range of motion and ankylosis?
That's a good question. Thank you. Active range of motion is that which the person being evaluated can't do on their own. And that's how we evaluate upper extremity and lower extremity motion. It's active. What can that person do on their own? Passive motion is the ability, is the capacity with the doctor assisting. So maybe a person can't lift their hand, their arm up over their shoulder on their own, but the doctor can help. That's the passive motion. The active motion is that which the person being examined can do. Ankylosis means motion's gone. It's locked in some spot, and cannot be moved actively or passively. It's been fused. Most of the time, the fusion is probably due to an operative fusion for other medical reasons, but that's the difference among the three. So I hope I explained that okay. And we want to evaluate, and the doctors are asked to evaluate active motion. Sometimes they do give you passive motion as well, just to see the capacity of that individual, but we're rating active motion. So that's range of motion. That's how that's done. There, you add them. There's probably more than one figure associated with it. The doctor needs to do measures, go to that, maybe interpolate around in order to get the impairment values. You add them for that joint. We're going to add all the shoulder motion joint values together, and ultimately we need to get it to whole person to rate it. We're not going to rate 10% upper extremity. We're going to rate that conversion to 6% whole person. That's how we're going to rate that. The next method we see most frequently is entrapment, compression. That's a peripheral nerve injury, and those are, the impairment numbers are 16, start with 16.01. 0.02 tells us it's an upper extremity nerve injury. It's not a wrist, it's not an elbow, it's not a shoulder, musculoskeletal, it's a nerve injury. Carpal tunnel is the one we see most frequently. That's in the wrist here, the median nerve below mid forearm goes, get compression at the wrist, and the nerve goes down into the digits, and that's evaluated. There's specific methods for doing carpal tunnel. Page 495 is a good recap of how to do carpal tunnel surgery. It's the doctor does actual examination and assesses any permanent loss of sensory and or motor function. And it's possible that if, even though there isn't any objective basis for sensory or motor function, if there is a confirmed diagnosis of carpal tunnel and there's still subjective tingling and numbness, then the doctor can go here and use this. It doesn't have to be a surgery, but a doctor can go here. There does have to be a confirmed diagnosis. So 5% upper extremity, 3% whole person. That's not uncommon that we see that. So this table here is used to help assess peripheral nerve injuries. And this table 1615 gives maximum values of nerves, sensory and motor function. So for instance, in gray here, the median nerve below mid forearm, this is carpal tunnel. And the maximum for that median nerve as it goes through the mid forearm down into the digits of the hand is 39% upper extremity. It's upper extremity impairment is the maximum, and for motor deficit, the maximum is 10% upper extremity. So the doctor's role is to determine the loss of function in a percent and to apply that to the maximum, and that's the upper extremity value. It gets converted to whole person and rated that way as carpal tunnel. Tables 1610 and 1611 are aids for the doctor to try to assess what the grade level of deficit and the specific sensory deficit value that's to be applied to that maximum. And I hope I have another question.
I'm going to chime in here because this seems like a popular one. We've got a couple questions on carpal tunnel release impairments and whether they can be combined with things like grip strength and other sensory motor losses.
They can be combined with other sensory motor losses if it's a different nerve. Yes, if there could be more than one nerve that's injured, and they should each be rated, evaluated separately and rated separately. We've got information later coming up that no, it should not be combined with strength. It's specifically precluded according to the AMA guides that compression neuropathies should be, if there's loss of strength, it should be evaluated by motor loss of that nerve. So no, it should not be combined that way.
Thanks,
Was there an additional part of that question that I missed? That it? Okay, thank you. And thanks for the questions, I appreciate it. So sensory quality, the AMA guides talks about 2-point discrimination and Semmes-Weinstein. There's one place within chapter 16 that offers some assessment as to what we should be looking for in terms of specific values. That's page 446, when it's given the instructions on how to do digit sensory loss. And in general, 6 millimeters or less of 2-point discrimination means it's normal. And so this is the one piece within the AMA guide where we get some real guidance as to what the objective findings should be if a doctor is doing objective findings on that in evaluating sensory loss. If it's 6 millimeters or less, that really, according to the AMA guide, says there's no sensory deficit, and it's not rateable that way. Here's an example of how I kind of sort of talked about it, but carpal tunnel, this is how it's done. If there's both sensory and motor loss for the same nerve, you do each one separately and combine them at the upper extremity impairment level, and which you get the total for carpal tunnel or whatever nerve it is, convert it to whole person to rate it. We round at every step of the way. Other disorders is a third method we see most frequently in chapter 16, and it's a generic group of a lot of different things. And ultimately, most of them rely on this, table 1618, which gives maximum values for different joints within the upper extremity. And then the different, I don't have them in here. Then there are maybe different other disorders where a doctor will be able to evaluate a percentage loss of whatever joint is being evaluated. That specific loss from that specific other disorders table would then be applied to the maximum value. I want to stress that this is not an evaluation table by itself. It gets used a lot incorrectly as an impairment table by itself. It is not. These are maximum values. So it can help you understand what the maximum value is for that injured body part. But this is not an impairment table. It's not an evaluation method. It's only a method in conjunction with other parts of that other disorder section. Arthroplasty, this is something we see a lot with shoulders, specifically distal clavicle resections. Although it's not automatic in the AMA guides, the DU has determined it is going to be automatic. If there's been a distal clavicle resection, they're going to give 10% upper extremity for that. A distal clavicle resection is a distal clavicle resection. It's not an acromioplasty. It's not any other type of surgery associated with the shoulder. It's a distal clavicle resection. It should be expressed that way in the operative report in order to truly qualify for the 10% upper extremity. That can be combined with range of motion method. In general, each specific disorder section within Chapter 16 needs to be looked at to see what it can and cannot be combined with. Unfortunately, Chapter 16 is not really clear in one spot. There's no table that says, yes, you combine this and that. No, you can't combine this and that. But you have to go to each specific other disorder in order to read that. However, strength evaluation, which is the third we see most commonly and is in other disorders, the AMA guides offers a lot of cautions about the use of strength. It says they can be subjective. And that's grip strength, that's manual muscle testing. It can be subjective. So they're really looking that they don't want that used very often. In general, it also cautions that it's got to be permanent. So there's a specific caution. Really, strength evaluation shouldn't be done, if it's going to be done, shouldn't be done until a year after the last surgery or from date of injury if there is no surgery, because it's probably not permanent as of that time. It's got to be objective and it's got to be non-overlapping with other body parts. I'm going to scoot ahead here to the right shoulder. If you do combine impairment types, shoulders is the most common. We see range of motion and a distal clavicle resection. If you're combining, you combine at the extremity impairment level and then convert. The rating schedule, page 1-11, tells us to do it that way. Combine at the extremity impairment level if you're dealing with the same body part. And that is very clear there on page 111 of the rating schedule. In terms of overlap, peripheral neuropathy cannot be combined with a lot of things. So just pay attention to that. Strength cannot be combined with peripheral neuropathy. Again, unless it's something completely different that caused that. But in general, the AMA guides talks about strength being highly potentially subjective and highly potentially overlaps with some other more objective method of evaluation. So it doesn't really encourage us to use that. And use of strength with carpal tunnel as a result of carpal tunnel really is precluded by the instruction within Chapter 16 of the AMA guides. With respect to other disorders, as I said, you got to check each method within the rating schedule, within Chapter 16, to see what can and cannot be combined. Strength is usually not combined with any other method, and in fact, the AMA guide says if there's pain, that probably makes the strength evaluation subjective and probably precludes the use of strength evaluation. So strength evaluation, the AMA guides is not fully supportive. There's a section in there that discusses it, and it is an appropriate method, but they don't believe it should be the primary method or the only method. Motion peripheral neuropathy. This one tells you what can and cannot. If it's a peripheral neuropathy, unless it's actually diagnosed CRPS, then you don't use that with decreased motion for the same part of the body. By that I mean, if it's carpal tunnel, you do the peripheral neuropathy. You don't do wrist motion, but if there's elbow loss of motion separate, yeah, you'd use that. But if the carpal tunnel causing diminished wrist motion, you don't do both. You do the carpal tunnel. There's, again, more compression, more cautions about the use of strength. Compression neuropathies, you don't give grip strength. You don't give grip strength for the elbow or the shoulder. You can for the forearm and the wrist if you're going to give it, but it's in a rare case that strength is used. I'm going to keep scooting through here. Strength principles. Page 508 gives all sorts of cautions about use of strength. So if you see that, take a look at it. Table 16.4, Chapter 16. Every table and every figure is going to start with the chapter number. So 16.4 tells us in Chapter 16. Amputations. I'm looking at my time, and I've spent a lot here, but I want to show this amputation values. I think these are a good good thing to look at if you have a significant injury of the upper extremity. This is a good place to look for what your maximum is going to be. Amputations of different parts of the upper extremity and different parts of a digit, these give you maximum values. So that this would tell me that as somebody who had a thumb injury, the overall WPI really can't be over 22% WPI. It really can't be. So if a doctor's doing range of motion and neurological deficits and grip strength, and it gets over that, it's not allowed. These are maximum values. So I think these are a good thing to keep in mind. Amputations are maximum values for that part of the body. So as a summary, upper extremity hand digit values, make sure you're paying attention to which values the doctor's using and which value you're rating. Objective findings should lead the doctor to the correct chapter, correct table, correct class. I'm going to, by necessity, I'm going to go through chapter 17 more quickly and just go through a couple of things here. Lower extremity, an entire lower extremity, 100% of a leg is worth 40% whole person. There's a couple of tables within chapter 17 that give foot values, and there's no conversion table for that, but 100% of a foot is 70% lower extremity. Every table gives lower extremity value, so you don't need to memorize or do conversions from foot. You shouldn't have to. The table and figure will give you the value. There's conversion table within chapter 17. Chapter 17, table 17.2, this is, in my mind, a terrific table. This one makes it clear in chapter 17 what can and cannot be combined in terms of methods for evaluating the same part of a lower extremity. The chapter 16 doesn't give us a nice table like that. Chapter 17 does. Anytime a doctor is using more than one method to evaluate a knee, for instance, or an ankle, that you should look at this and see if they can be combined. If more than one method is being combined for a lower extremity impairment, double check on this table to see if it's appropriate. This really is a good table and helpful table. Ensure that we're using it the correct way. We're dealing with non-overlapping assessments. Range of motion arthritis and the DBE are the most common methods that we see. I'm going to scoot ahead. I'm going to show you the range of motion tables. They're completely different than what the upper extremity motion tables look like. And if you have for the same part of the body, you add the values. They'll tell you what values they are. These are whole person with lower extremity value included. So make sure we're rating only whole person. If we're combining at the extremity impairment level, and not at the whole person level. For table 1731 is arthritis. I'm not going to go into it. I just want to give you an idea of what some of these tables look like within chapter 17. So arthritis tables, a doctor should be doing measurements, and based on the current measurement, that tells them what the value is for that particular cartilage space. And it gives you a whole person and up and lower extremity impairment values. I'm going to look at table 1733 because that's what so many things come from, and it's called the diagnosis-based estimates. And in this chapter in table 1733, there are some automatic WPIs. A meniscectomy is an automatic WPI. You need to pay attention to what specifically was done. But it's an automatic WPI. There are some automatic WPIs. A hip replacement is automatic WPI. The doctor needs to do some evaluating. It could be anywhere from 15 to 30% WPI, as can a knee. So, but there's automatic WPI for some of these things. So this table is an excellent reference and really something you should be able to find, and the doctor should be able to find. And we should be able to check what the doctor did based on the documentation of what the injury actually was. And there's some diagnosis-based ones here that are really helpful and pretty clear what the impairment should be from the AMA guides. I'm going to keep going here. I want to show you gait derangement. There are all sorts of cautions in the AMA guides about using gait derangement. It can only be used by itself. It recommends use a more specific method when you can. There's potential subjectivity in gait derangement as well. And so it's not adopted as the most frequent and easy to use method to use in the AMA guides. It's there, but it should only be used when no other method is available to rate. This is from the AMA guides. Amputations, chapter 17 has amputations again. Nothing you need to memorize, but I think when you're looking at significant lower extremity injury, you can look here and get what the high end should be. And I think that's always helpful to have that, what the high end should be. Chapter 13 addresses the central and peripheral nervous system. In my opinion, these tables should not apply to an orthopedic chapter 16 or chapter 17 injury, although they get used a lot. I think that the objective findings should be used, and the tables and figures within chapter 16 and chapter 17 should be used to correlate those objective findings to WPI. But some doctors are using these. Again, my opinion is most of the time they're probably not the right way to do it. So WPI reporting, you want to read the WPI report, see what the doctor's talking about, and go on and on from there. And I have overstayed my time. In general, the AMA guides is not jurisdictional. The rating schedule should be based primarily on objective medical data. Only rate whole person impairment using our rating schedule for California. Do I have questions as yet unanswered?
I have to say, Alex and Dave have been answering questions for the entire hour, and I think they're
Thank
fairly
you.
caught up, but we do have 2 minutes. So Alex, if there is a question that you'd like to present, I think we could answer one.
Sure. Tim, how about gait derangement as discussed in chapter 17 versus the neurological discussion in chapter 13?
How about it in terms of when should we use
What's
it?
the difference and when should you use which table?
In my opinion, if it's a lower extremity injury, a musculoskeletal injury to the lower extremity, chapter 17 is what should apply. Chapter 13 should not. Does that answer the question?
I think so. I think
Okay.
so. It was and what about if it's for the back?
If it's for the back, chapter 17 has a caution that make sure that the lower extremity impairment is due to the lower extremity and not to the back. If it's to the back, it should be incorporated within the back rating because incorporated within an assessment for radiculopathy, if that's the case, or if there's a post-surgery neurological issue, then it should be addressed that way through the lumbar spine and the neurological issues related to that. Did I answer that one?
I think so. I think so. I think it was just discussing, because I think that's probably a common thing that we see a lot.
We do.
Is that gait derangement.
Yes, and in my opinion, it's overused. And the AMA guides is pretty clear and pretty consistent that it should only be used when there's not a more specific method. And by specific, I interpret that to mean objective, easily identifiable, measurable, objective method for evaluation.
Okay, well, thank you so much to our ratings team. You guys are awesome. Thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. We hope you all enjoyed the training, and we hope to see you next month. Take care, everybody.
Thank you.